Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are diving into the incredible story of Apache Kafka. We're going to trace its journey from a humble tool built to handle log data at LinkedIn all the way to becoming the absolute powerhouse at the heart of modern data streaming. We'll see how it took on and conquered one of engineering's hardest problems after another to become the giant it is today. Now, to really get Kafka, you have to appreciate this quote. This right here is the whole ballgame. See, Kafka wasn't built for just simple messaging. No, it was designed from day one to solve the gnarliest, most difficult problems in distributed systems. And that ambition, well, that's the key to its entire story. So let's roll back the clock. Where did this all begin? Our story starts at LinkedIn. Now, they were facing an absolute flood of data, just an overwhelming amount, and they realized they needed to use it for way more than just offline reports. They needed a completely new way to handle data in real time. And just look at the sheer amount and variety of data we're talking about here. I mean, every single click, every like, every search, every little system metric, it was a constant tidal wave of events. The challenge wasn't just about storing it. The real problem was, how do you use that wave of data right now, instantly, to power the live website? The tools they had at the time, they just couldn't keep up, not even close. So, what was Kafka's big idea? What was the stroke of genius? Well, instead of building something ridiculously complex, the creators went back to basics. They chose a fundamental and incredibly powerful concept, the distributed commit log. And let me tell you, this architectural choice, it changed everything. Now, this idea is so simple, it's almost deceptive, but it's brilliant. Just think of it like a diary that you can only write in at the very end. Producers, they just add new events or records to the end of the log. And consumers, they read them in the exact order they were written, starting from a specific point, kind of like a bookmark called an offset. This simplicity, you see, that's the real key to its power. So how in the world does Kafka get that legendary performance? Well, first off, by sticking to these super simple sequential reads and writes, it avoids all that slow random disk access. Second, and this is really clever, instead of building its own complex memory cache, it just piggybacks on the operating system's super fast page cache. And finally, the real kicker, it uses a technique called zero copy to sling data directly from that cache to the network without any wasteful intermediate copies. It's just an incredibly efficient design from the ground up. And here's another masterstroke, its pull model. You see, unlike traditional systems that just push messages out and risk totally overwhelming the consumers, Kafka lets the consumer ask for data when it's good and ready. This puts the consumer in the driver's seat, which is great. But the real power here, the absolute game changer, is the ability to easily rewind the tape and reprocess historical data. This single feature unlocks massive value. It lets you build entirely new applications off the very same data stream long after it was first written. Okay, so Kafka is fast. It's scalable. We get it. But is it reliable? Well, that brings us to its next great mountain to climb. Tackling one of the most notoriously difficult problems in all of distributed computing, guaranteeing that a message is processed exactly once. So, in distributed systems, you usually have to face a trade-off. You kind of have to pick your poison. Your first option is at most once delivery. This basically means the system would rather lose a message if something fails than ever risk processing a duplicate. It puts avoiding duplicates above all else. The second option is the total opposite, at least once. Here, the system promises you'll never, ever lose a message. But to make that guarantee, it might have to resend messages after a failure, which, you guessed it, can lead to duplicates. So here, delivery is king, even if it means you see the same message twice. And then there's the holy grail, exactly once. This is what everyone wants. It means no data loss and no duplicates ever, even when things are failing left and right. It's the absolute gold standard, but it is incredibly, incredibly complex to get right. So how did Kafka actually pull this off? Well, it was a two-pronged attack. First, they introduced the idempotent producer. It basically adds a sequence number to messages so the broker can easily spot and just discard any duplicates that come from retries. Simple, but effective. Second, Kafka introduced transactions. This lets you treat a whole series of messages as a single, all-or-nothing operation. Either the entire batch succeeds or it all fails together. No in-between. All right, so with this incredible speed and rock-solid reliability, Kafka's adoption just exploded. But of course, this created a brand new problem. Storing these massive, ever-growing streams of data forever on expensive, high-performance disks, well, it just wasn't going to work financially. It was becoming way too expensive. The solution here is just so elegant. It's called tiered storage. The idea is all the most recent, hot data lives on those fast, local SSDs for instant, real-time access. But as that data gets older and is accessed less, Kafka automatically and seamlessly moves it to a much cheaper, warm tier, like cloud object storage. You really get the best of both worlds. And this architecture is a total game changer. It means you can scale your storage almost infinitely without having to scale your expensive compute resources alongside it. You get the huge cost savings of cheap object storage for all your historical data while keeping your critical, real-time traffic totally isolated on that high-performance tier. It's brilliant. Now, for the final major leap in Kafka's evolution, freeing itself from its biggest operational dependency, a coordination service you might have heard of called ZooKeeper. Yeah, for most of its life, a Kafka cluster just couldn't run without ZooKeeper. It had to rely on this completely separate external system to manage all of its most critical metadata. Things like which brokers are alive, who's the leader for a given partition, all that stuff. And this meant operators had to manage, maintain, and scale two separate, complex distributed systems. It was a real headache. The new way is called KRaft, which stands for Kafka Raft. And in a really brilliant move, Kafka now uses its own log architecture, the very thing that made it great in the first place, to manage its own metadata. It's become self-sufficient. And this, as you can imagine, dramatically simplifies everything: deployment, management, and day-to-day operations. And we're not just talking about simplicity here. The performance gains are absolutely massive. In a big cluster, if the main controller node failed, it could take the old ZooKeeper-based system half a minute or even more to elect a new one. That's an eternity. With KRaft, that same failover happens in less than 5 seconds. That is a huge, huge leap in availability and resilience for the whole cluster. So after this incredible journey of innovation, from a simple log aggregator to a self-managed, transaction-capable, tiered storage streaming platform, let's just take a moment and recap why Kafka has become the de facto go-to standard for data in motion. This comparison really makes Kafka's unique place in the world crystal clear. I mean, sure, a tool like RabbitMQ is fantastic for traditional message queuing, but Kafka, it was purpose-built from the ground up for high-throughput event streaming. Its core architecture, that simple log, the pull model, and permanent storage as a core feature, that's what allows it to handle data at a scale that others just can't touch. From its humble beginnings at LinkedIn to its status today as a global data backbone, Kafka's evolution has been just relentless. It fundamentally changed how we all think about data, turning it from something we analyze later into something we can act on right now. And that leaves us with this final, exciting question you see right here. With this kind of power, what problems will we solve next? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.